Sometimes history doesn't vanish because someone destroyed it. Sometimes it just walks away. In the summer of 2026, in one of the driest places on Earth, a team of Egyptian archaeologists brushed the sand off a low mud wall in the western desert. They expected a house, maybe two. They found a city. Straight streets running north to south, crossroads cutting east to west, open squares, watchtowers on the edge, and at the center, rising over the rooftops, a church. No pharaohs here, no gold masks, no giant statues glaring at the sun. This was something stranger and far more intimate, because inside one of these houses, they found a name. Not a king, not a general, an ordinary man, a church deacon named Tisous, who lived and prayed and died in this town more than 1,600 years ago. And then, at a moment history never bothered to record, everyone left. The doors closed, the sand came in, and it kept coming for 16 centuries. Here is what makes this discovery so strange. This was not a city destroyed by war. It was not swallowed by an earthquake. It was not burned to the ground. It simply stopped. By the end of this story, you'll see how a few broken pieces of pottery brought an entire town back to life after 16 centuries. You'll meet the ordinary people who lived here, by name, and you'll come face to face with the one question no one can fully answer. What makes a complete city disappear? Chapter 1. A city that should not exist. To understand why this find stunned the people who made it, start with where it is. An Egyptian mission uncovered it at a site called el-Sabil, inside the Dakhla Oasis, hundreds of kilometers west of the Nile, deep in the heart of the western desert. And that location makes it almost impossible. This is the Sahara, the largest hot desert on the planet. In summer, the sand can grow hot enough to burn skin. Rain barely exists. Without water, no town can survive out here for a single season. And yet, in the middle of all that nothing, there is Dakhla, a pocket of green in an ocean of sand. The answer lies underground, tens of thousands of years ago. When North Africa was far wetter than it is today, enormous amounts of rain soaked deep into the earth. The climate dried, the rain stopped, but that ancient water stayed, trapped beneath the Sahara. And where it reaches the surface, an oasis is born. Palm trees, fields of wheat, olive groves, life, in the last place you would look for it. For as long as there have been people in Egypt, someone has lived in Dakhla. Hunters when the desert was green, farmers in the age of the pharaohs, and later, under Rome and Byzantium, whole communities who turned these oases into working frontier towns. But Ain el-Sabil was not a cluster of farmers' huts. It was a designed town, built with intention, built to last. Look at the plan and you can tell. The main streets run north to south, deliberately aligned. Smaller roads cross them at intervals, cutting the town into blocks, the way a planner draws them. There are open public squares, where people gathered to trade, to argue, to celebrate, and to pray. They built it all from mud and straw, pressed into brick, dried in the sun. Sounds fragile? In a land with almost no rain, mud outlives marble. Some of these walls have stood for 16 centuries, and they are standing still. And the houses were not simple boxes. Many had wide reception rooms for welcoming guests, a quiet mark of comfort and status. Their roofs curved up into gentle brick vaults that carried their own weight, with no wooden beam anywhere, in a desert where timber was rare and precious. Then the archaeologists noticed something on the outskirts: watchtowers. And that detail changes everything. People do not build watchtowers unless they expect danger. So who, or what, were they watching for? Desert raiders? Passing caravans? The far frontier of an empire? This peaceful oasis was not cut off from the world. It was living on its edge. And at the very center of town stood its most important building. Not a palace, not a fortress, a church. Because by the 4th century, Egypt had entered a new age. The temples of the old gods had given way to Christianity. This was Byzantine Egypt, the eastern rim of the Roman world, and out here in the sand, an ordinary community had built its whole life around faith. The buildings tell us where these people lived. The next discovery would tell us who they were. And for the first time in 16 centuries, one of them would speak again. Chapter 2. The Man History Forgot. Ancient cities are usually remembered for their rulers, a pharaoh, a king, an emperor. This city was different. Its greatest discovery was not made of gold. It was not a statue. It was not a royal tomb. It was a name. Inside one of the houses, the team identified the home of a church deacon named Tisous, who lived here in the second half of the 4th century. In that moment, this stopped being an archaeological site. It became someone's neighborhood. Think about what a deacon actually is. Not a bishop, not a saint, not a name history was ever meant to keep. A deacon ran the small machinery of a church. He cared for the poor. He was there every single week. He is exactly the kind of ordinary person time erases without a trace. And yet, here he is. His home still standing, his name still spoken. He was not the first either. An earlier building points to a man named Tabibos from the very beginning of the 4th century. The archaeologists believe it may have been the community's first church, before the basilica ever went up. So we are reading the layers of a living faith. One generation prays in a plain room. The next generation, larger and richer and more sure of itself, tears it down and raises something grander in its place. This is not the history of emperors and armies. This is the history of a neighborhood, growing up, one family at a time. And then there are the letters. Chapter 3. 200 Voices. Across the town, the mission recovered nearly 200 ostraca. At first glance, they look like nothing, broken pieces of pottery. But in the ancient world, a shard of pottery was scrap paper, cheap, everywhere, thrown away without a thought. And the people of this city covered them in ink, in 2 languages at once. Coptic, the everyday tongue of Egyptian Christians, the last living echo of the language the pharaohs spoke, and Greek, the language of money, trade, and empire across the Byzantine world. Think about what these fragments really are. Not royal decrees carved in granite to flatter the gods. Receipts, tax notes, a record of who delivered the grain and who still owed for a jar of oil. A letter to a brother in the next town. The ordinary paperwork of ordinary lives, 1,600 years old, and still readable in the sand. These are not the voices of kings. They are the voices of neighbors. And strangely, those ordinary voices often tell us far more about the past than any monument ever could. If this story is pulling you in, take 1 second and subscribe. This channel exists to dig these forgotten worlds back out of the sand, because what people leave behind by accident says more about how they lived than anything they built on purpose, because the letters were not alone. The objects in these homes reveal something surprising. Life here was not just possible, it was comfortable, maybe even prosperous. There were small, finely made bottles shaped to hold oils and perfumes. People fighting just to survive do not think about perfume. These families cared about comfort, about scent, about the small pleasures that make an ordinary day feel normal. There were oil lamps, So when the desert sun dropped below the horizon, these rooms did not fall dark. Children could still learn. Parents could still work. Families could still gather and talk and pray in the warm gold of a single flame. And there were heavy grinding stones. Unlike the delicate bottles, these speak of labor. Every morning, someone knelt beside those stones and ground wheat into flour. Bread here was not delivered. It was earned, 1 hour of aching work at a time. Then came the discovery that pinned the whole town to a moment in history: gold coins. Not local imitations, real imperial currency, struck under the Emperor Constantius II, a son of Constantine the Great, who ruled from the year 337 to 361. Gold, in a desert town, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest city. That gold is how we know, almost to the decade, when these streets were full. And it means this remote oasis was tied by trade to one of the greatest empires on earth. Put it all together, and the city breathes. Now stand in that square at dawn. Wood smoke rising into a cold desert morning, the scrape of stone on grain from 100 kitchens at once. Merchants unlocking their doors onto the square. Tisous walking toward the basilica as neighbors call out to one another. Watchmen scanning the empty horizon from the towers. Nothing about this morning feels like an ending, because no one ever wakes up knowing they are living in the final years of their world. Chapter 4. The Silence. And yet, at some point, all of it stopped. The lamps went cold. The grinding stones went quiet. Nobody picked up the letters lying in the street. The deacon's house emptied. The basilica lost its people. And the desert, patient as always, poured back in through the open doors. So what happened? Why does a thriving, planned, prosperous town simply end? Here is the honest answer. Nobody knows for certain. There are no chronicles of its final days, no dramatic inscription, no eyewitness. History just goes silent. But the city still holds clues, and the archaeologists have suspects. The first, and the quietest, is water. This whole town lived for one reason: the springs. But that water was old, fossil water, laid down in a wetter age and never refilled. Draw on it long enough, and the level drops. Springs that ran for centuries can weaken and die inside a single lifetime. And when the water goes, there is nothing to discuss. You leave, or you die. The second suspect is the slow turning of the wider world. In the centuries after this town was built, the Byzantine grip on Egypt loosened. In the 7th century, Egypt passed into the Islamic world, and the old Christian Greek-speaking order gave way to something new. Trade routes moved. Power moved. A small Christian town in the deep desert, once a useful stop on the road to somewhere, could suddenly find itself bypassed, left off the map of a changing empire. And most likely, it was never one dramatic blow at all. No flood, no massacre, no fire in the night, just a slow leak of reasons to stay. One family packs up for the valley. A year later, another follows. The market grows quieter. The baker closes his oven. Children's voices fade from the streets. The watchtower still stands, but there is nothing left to watch. Until one ordinary afternoon, the last person walks out the gate, and no one writes it down, because at that moment, it does not feel like the end of a world. It just feels like moving on. The city did not die overnight. It faded, quietly, almost invisibly. And that is exactly why its story feels so familiar, because history is not always changed by great disasters. Sometimes it changes one small decision at a time. Chapter 5. The Desert That Remembered. Most abandoned cities slowly disappear. Rain dissolves their walls, roots split their foundations. New towns rise on the ruins until nothing is left. This city was different. The same desert that forced its people out is the reason we have it back. Almost no rain to wear down the mud, dry air to slow decay, blowing sand to seal the streets and houses and everyday objects beneath a protective blanket. The desert did not destroy this town, it paused it for more than 1,600 years. And here is the irony at the heart of the whole discovery. If this city had stayed alive, most of this would be gone. Old houses get rebuilt, documents get thrown away, walls come down to make room for new ones. Instead, abandonment became preservation. The last families to leave handed their entire world to the future without ever knowing it. We remember the pharaohs because they screamed at us across time. They stacked mountains of stone for one purpose: to never be forgotten. Tisous did not build a pyramid. He left a house, a name, and a few words scratched on broken pottery. By every rule of history, he should have disappeared completely. Instead, 1,600 years later, we walk his streets. We stand where his church stood. We read his neighbor's mail. And the story is not even close to finished. The 200 letters have barely begun to be read. The archaeologists believe much of the city still lies buried, waiting, only a few meters down. More streets, more homes, perhaps more names. We do not know the year this city died. We may never know. But we know it lived. We know a deacon named Tisous walked these streets and worried about grain and prayed under a curved brick roof and never once imagined that the most lasting thing he would ever leave behind was the sand that buried him. So here is the question we leave you with. This city was complete. It had names and faith and gold and 200 letters. And still, it slipped out of the world so quietly that no one thought to write down the ending. How much of what we are building right now is one long drought away from that same silence? And 1,000 years from now, when someone brushes the sand away, whose ordinary name will still be there, waiting to be found?